Hello everyone, so my name's Tinko and this is my brother Tinzen and we're a part of the FTC team 12993, the Robokings. Today we're going to talk about ways you can optimize your robot so you have the best performance possible on the playing field. So optimization is defined as making the most effective use out of a resource. And if you don't try and optimize your robot, you're never going to reach the full potential of your design. So today we're going to cover optimizing through prototyping, reducing all failure points, wiring, driver practice, and coding.
So first off, we're going to give you a brief overview of how we optimize the design. So from our initial CAD, we like to do a quick build through using cheaper materials. So MDF is what we use, but if you can use a different one, then go for it. And that's to find all the major flaws in the robot design. So obviously the CAD design is not going to get everything right on the first try. Like there might be a screw hole that's in the wrong place, or there's a part that actually hits and you couldn't see it in CAD because there's a lot of mechanisms moving. So we'll do a quick run through. We'll try and be as fast as possible. So like using 2 screws where you could have used 4, things like that, because you know it's going to be redone. And then we'll find the errors, fix them in CAD, and kind of repeat this process. When we repeat this process on the second and third times, we tend to more so look at the limiting factor for design performance. So we'll do tests focused on, all right, everything else works, but all right, what is limiting the design right now? So maybe it's the speed of the transfer or something like that. And then when we consider a solution from that, we'll try and consider all possibilities. So I think personally, if you spend more time in this step, then the better your solution will be. So all possibilities includes your time frame, how consistent the mechanism will be, and especially the packaging. Like if there's a better way you could reorganize the parts, then that's a great way to do it. And then obviously repeat until you have the final product. So I'll run you guys through an example of this on our robot. So this is coming up to Worlds. We started with the initial CAD, and this subsystem you're seeing on the screen is the arm for our outtake. So we started with the same idea, all the same concepts, and it was basically a claw on an arm that was directly driven by a servo, and then there was a pole guide which flipped down on the cone and then helped guide the claw onto the pole. So we built it in MDF quickly, and we realized that some of the positioning wasn't right. So the brace was too low, wasn't high enough to grasp the cone effectively and work on the pole. And we also realized that the 3D printed adapter from the arm to the servo wasn't quite right. So these are kind of the major things that I'm talking about fixing first. And then after we reevaluated and did some more testing, we realized that the claw on the arm was the limiting factor in the performance. So we did, I think, 6 iterations of a claw, and this one was in the bottom right-hand corner. This one was what we found to be the best balance between how compact it was, how light it was, and how well we could mount it onto our arm, and obviously the shape of the grippers. And we attached that claw to the new arm, which still used a Go Builder U beam, and we had to repackage the servo so that it was standing upright instead of lying sideways, because with the new packaging, it would hit the slides as it came over. So we did that. And then afterwards, we realized we had too much extension on the arm. So we couldn't get those close lows close to the substation. So we actually switched from directly powering it using a servo to using gears to shift the pivot point further into the robot, so the arm had less extension. And then from that, we used a custom arm, so 2 aluminum plates sandwiched between 3D printed material instead of that Go Builder U-beam. And although they don't look very different from the start to finish, it's kind of the same thing. There was a lot of small optimization that went on there.
Okay, so obviously the worst thing that can happen in a match is for your robot to go completely dead in the water. So once it's built, you're going to try and spend as much time as possible to reduce failure points. I have a couple of examples of how we did that this season. So at Worlds, just after Autonomous in our qual match, we are completely disconnected because our battery wire got caught and unplugged. So for future matches, we always zip tied our wires together and away, even though that took 8 minutes. And then before our first qualification match, our RS485 cable had so much interference that our loop times were about 2000 and our robot wasn't working at all. So we had to put ferrite chokes on and use dryer sheets to help negate that. So ways like this, you can actually keep optimizing even throughout the competition. Another thing that we do is we use a manual reset mode. So our secondary driver can use joysticks to manually control the position of the slide and turret. And the way that you'll be using this is if your autonomous fails or there's a cone stuck in your robot, so your slides are in the wrong position and your encoders aren't reset properly. So if you manual reset your slides to the right position, you can click a button and reset your encoders so all your automated processes still work. Here's an example of us using this at APOC.
So in the example video, it's quite quick, but we've done a lot of practice with manual reset, so it should be that quick. But yeah, we would have been dead in the water if we didn't have something like that coded in.
So there are a lot of free build solutions that you can do to optimize. I've shown a couple of examples here. We use a lot of polycarb, so both 3 mil and 0.8 mil polycarb on our robot, which just help us to ensure that all of our wires can't get caught and all of the cones can't get stuck in the robot. So obviously, if something's stuck in your robot, you can't pick up another element in the last season. So you have to find ways to prevent that. The ways you can find your failure points is just by practice. So to make sure we couldn't get a cone stuck, we just kept chucking cones in our robot until we couldn't find a scenario where there was a cone able to be stuck. We also used polycarb to help hold back wires and make sure they couldn't get caught, but I'll tell you that later. So we manufacture all of our polycarb free build solutions just with a heat gun, and then we bend them over our kitchen sink. So it's really easy, it's really accessible. Another example of a free build solution is, as Tinzen was saying before, about limiting factor. On our outtake here, on this top arrow, our linear rail wasn't coming up fast enough. So our arm was sometimes occasionally hitting the top of it. So we just added surgical tubing to help counterspring. Optimizing your wiring is really important because it can be one of the most limiting factors on your robot. We optimized our wiring. We redid it 7 times fully on our robot Sandstorm before we went to Worlds. So a couple of the really important things when you're optimizing your wiring is failure points and how out of the way they are. You can use things like wire casing to make sure that your robot, the wires on your robot can't get caught. And if you have as minimal connections, it'll be really easy to diagnose problems when they do arise. So for example, all of our wires from all of our servos, we connected them to another wire, and then we laid that connection flat against the servo. And then we hand braided a length of wire all the way down to our turret. And then we connected it to our expansion hub. So there were only ever 2 connections on our servo wires. So if something went wrong, we knew where we had to check, and it would be really easy to diagnose and fix the problem. And we've also used large coils as much as possible. It's really important in your wiring to avoid twisting, crimping of the wire and bending, because the more practice you do, the more stress will go under, the more likely your wiring is to break. Yeah. One more thing when wiring, it's really important to try and solder as little as possible. Obviously, sometimes you can't avoid it, but solder will eventually crack.
Especially if it's undergoing movement. Especially.
So if you are soldering, you want to use double-walled heat shrink so that the connection is properly secured, and you want to make sure that it has little to no movement. But
so secured on something that's not moving, basically.
Like the side of a servo.
So obviously another part of optimization that's pretty important is drive practice. If you have a robot that's a good design and you've optimized it as well, you still won't be at 100%. You won't be at 100% of your potential without good drive practice. So firstly, obviously, is developing that driver skill. So it's different for every person. You know, some people are better at driving, some people are worse. But if you do more cycles, then you will improve in skill. And we like to think when we do practice that it's according to this graph shown on the PowerPoint. So even if you do like a lot of practice and you think you're not getting much better, in my experience, you generally are still getting a little bit better, and it's beneficial to put in the extra hours just to do more drive practice. Working on developing driver cohesion is also important. So what we like to do to avoid any miscommunication errors, which I know happens on a lot of FTC teams, is we like to develop a driver hierarchy. So
our secondary driver will always listen to our main driver, who takes the advice of the coach but our main driver will always have the final decision. So that way our secondary driver will never try and do something that the coach says that the main driver doesn't want to do.
And then there'll be confliction within the robot driving, and then that leads to lag performance.
To make sure that our driving is as smooth as possible, we actually practice driving silently without communication. So our secondary driver can read the robot and respond accordingly. This means that in match, when we do have the added communication, we just perform even better.
Another thing that is very important that a lot of teams don't train for, which we did a lot of training for coming up to Worlds, is the ability to deal with pressure and on-the-spot decisions. So when we're scouting teams as well, we also look for this because it's pretty important, because if you are in elimination matches, then it does get a bit nerve-wracking. But what we like to do is make our drive practice sessions as intense as possible. So there's multiple ways to do this. I mean, we use timers, so we're always working against the time. You can play loud music because there's obviously loud music at events, and we found from our experience that that can mess with your drivers. And we did a lot of 2v1s or 1v1s against a human leading up to World. So if we could beat a human, and we'd have the people we're versing always being slightly better than us, if that makes sense. So we're kind of always losing, but it pushes us to be just that little bit faster, and it pushes progress the fastest that we found.
The sense of competition will always drive up everyone.
Yeah.
Here's an example of us driving against our human just before Worlds.
This is quite a while ago, so driving wasn't as good back then. And lastly, developing a routine for the drive team. So if you have 4 people on your drive team, 3 people, developing a routine of who takes the robot out, who touches the drive station, who changes the battery I think it's pretty critical for how you do in qualification matches. Because as you know, FTC is all about consistency, and if you can develop that routine, it will add a tremendous amount of consistency across your competition. Oh, and sorry, lastly, a small point, but if your drivers can be working closely with your coders, it also takes out a bit of a bridge, and it just means that usually your driver will know what they want, and if the coder can do that, then it will just save headaches for everyone.
Let's double off on work.
And then lastly, optimizing code. This one's pretty simple as well. There's basically 4 ways you can optimize your code. So if you're doing drive practice or testing the robot, and you see something that's lacking, you basically code in an extra feature or sequence to increase your functionality. When you're tuning something, basically what you're trying to do, this is in autonomous as well, is change timings or sequences or actions to find a balance between speed and consistency. So obviously you can make an autonomous super fast, you can make a transfer super fast, but if it's not going to be consistent, then what's the point of it? So it's just finding that balance. Increasing automation, you've probably heard this, but it's generally a good thing to make the driver's job more streamlined, and it's another way of optimizing your driving performance. And then lastly, this is a big part of optimization, but it's pretty easy to say, increase the efficiency of your code. So this is basically reducing the loop times. So dealing with hardware reads, hardware writes from your code, that reduces the loop times of the program, and that will increase the speed and consistency of your mechanisms, especially if you're running some sort of control loop, which you will be. And then cleaning up your code helps with progress. I mean, if you can make changes easier because your code is cleaner, then you'll be able to optimize faster.
That's everything.
That's about it.
Thank you so much for listening. Please feel free to ask us any questions.
No questions?
Thank you. Yeah. Have any questions? So I have a question. Really good. On wiring, are you found that might be better than this?
Wait, sorry. Can someone repeat that question? It's just a bit hard to hear. Just maybe close. Just close to the camera or something. Sorry.
No problem. All right. So for wiring, first of all, your presentation was really, really good. I appreciate it. For wiring, one of the biggest problems we had with our team was servo wiring having issues, and especially at the connectors. We also make our own cables from time to time for the servos. Have you found or heard of any teams using any other types of connectors other than the standard 3-pin ones that are on the servo for doing their servo wiring?
Yes, absolutely. So we have used crimped connections in the past. We used an 8-pin crimped connector, which was waterproof and had a double locking mechanism. So we just put several wires from servos in and brought several wires out. So that was never going to come undone. Unfortunately, we had to replace it because it was too bulky. But using connectors like that is a great way to also increase the modularity of your robot.
Yeah.
So if you can create an entire new subsystem with one end of a crimp connector and have all your servo wires going into that, and then you can replace the hardware and the wiring pretty quickly. So yes, absolutely, we have done that and it works.
You can probably get them off Amazon. You don't have to use the standard 3-pin. With the wiring, we also like to use custom wire. So sometimes the cores, like the AnyMark or Rev wires, the cores are not, they like have less cores, and it means if you flex them a lot, then they tend to break. So using custom wire helps with that as well, if that's what your problem is.
All right, cool. Thank you.
One quick question. Any other question? You gonna go?
Yeah. So, do you guys compete during the summer?
The Australian season is kind of, well, FTC is made for Americans, right? So the Australian season is a bit weird. We have kind of a race from kickoff to regionals and nationals, having like 6 weeks from kickoff to regionals, and then that is, if you don't advance, your season's over. And then regionals to nationals is another 4 or 5 weeks, and then if you don't advance, then you can't go to Worlds. But from nationals, if you do advance, it slows down a bit. So we have basically most of the summer to work on a redesign or rebuild or optimizing our robot, whatever it is, for Worlds, which is in April. So it's basically, we have December till April for Worlds.
It's a bit of a double-edged sword because we have to get ready so much faster. So we have less time to think of a design that's absolutely perfect, but we have a lot more time to optimize after quali.
But we can still do something like what we did for Worlds this year, which is completely redesign the robot. And it's something we usually plan in for. So
Cool. Thank you. Does anyone else have questions?
So if I solder the connectors to a different type of connectors, would that be legal, or do I have to?
They can probably answer that, but I'll answer it if they don't. So you repeat the question that was asked. Let me get over here so you can hear it.
thank you.
There was a question about legality of soldering connectors. So can you replace and solder connectors for the wires? Is that your question? So I'll let you all answer that, and then if I don't like your answer, I'll answer it.
Yeah, so there's really one main, you can obviously, you can solder wires. There's really one main restriction for your wires, and it's to do with the wiring gauge. So it has to be
22 gauge or AWD.
I think it's 20 gauge or 22 gauge or lower, something like that. But yeah, you can solder all your servo wires. There are a couple rules around color as well. I probably other people are better at answering that, but as long as you're using the right gauge wire, really.
I'm just gonna go grab my laptop charger. I'll be right back.
Your answer was correct.
So do you guys have any procedure to ensure when you pack all the way from Australia and ship your robot to Houston, right, to make it can recover to fully perform to a state that is fully performing? So how do you make sure like the robot is not damaged or getting?
We got a lot of questions about this at Worlds and when we went to MTI as well. But we like to have a lot of people just chuck it in like a box with foam.
A Pelican box.
But we have a custom wood box. I mean, it doesn't matter what box you use, but we like to mount the actual frame of the robot to the box. Because we've had, when we came out of Houston Airport, for example, the robot was upside down. When we came out of LA, it was on its side. So if you're not, if you're mounting the robot, like the actual frame, so say it's a side plate or something, to the box, maybe bolt it to the box or something, and then you can lay all the foam around, zip tie everything so that there's no slides moving out or anything. It can take being upside down and still be fine. So our robot was fine at Worlds. And
So we build a frame on the base of our robot. So all of our odometry pods and all the really fragile parts are connected in a shell, and then we secure everything down, and we actually tip our robot upside down and shake it to see if anything breaks.
Yeah.
Which is a little bit nerve-wracking.
it's a bit scary, but
Any other questions? Anyone from online?
I want to see a kangaroo go.
Okay. So yeah, thank you, Robokings, for presenting. I think you can go.